All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Connect with the Chamber. We are here today to look at cybercrimes, and I'm sure you're all very interested to know more or less what goes on in the world of technology, etc. So we have Sean Allam in presentation with us. He's our host today. He's a solution engineer as well as the managing director of CloudStrength. He customizes great software solutions and packages, all tailor-made to customers' needs and industries in specific. So, but I'm sure Sean can give us a whole extensive background exactly of what cybercrimes is, so that we are well informed going forward. So welcome to today's session. Just a bit of etiquette. There is a mute button. I'd like everybody to be muted while Sean is doing his presentation. And then if anyone's got a question, there is a chat box, and we'll be asking questions after the session with Sean. And obviously, more intense questions, we can have a one-on-one with Sean afterwards if need be. All right, guys, so enjoy and welcome, Sean. Welcome to our session.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for that introduction. Okay, so I'm going to try and get my screen sharing working. Give me a minute. Screen share. Okay, let me launch the presentation on my side first. Okay, just 1 second. So let's go back to share here and screen. There we go. Okay, I probably have to push the share button. Sorry, I'm from the Microsoft Teams world more than the Zoom world, so you'll have to shout at me if I'm not winning there. But it looks like it's presenting. Can everyone see? And are we up and running on that side, Sam?
Yes, I can see your screen. I'm sure everyone's good. Yes.
Good, let's get going. Okay, so the discussion today, we are going to talk about cybercrime, but I've decided to flavor it a little bit towards the new cybercrime, or sort of the new direction that we're seeing in cybercrime, and that's the strange situation that we find ourselves in with this world that we live in now, where we're all working from home. Not necessarily all of us. I think with level 2, a lot of individuals have returned back to the office, but what we're seeing in other countries is that there's going to be second waves. You know, we possibly might find ourselves all being sent home, as was the case in Melbourne recently. And we certainly want to know how it is that we can protect ourselves when we are working away from the office. And this is very different to just remote work. It's actually, it's a totally different scenario. So first and foremost, I think I'd like to welcome everyone that has attended today. Zoom and Teams all seem to be the new norm. I noticed a lot of people have their cameras off, and I suspect this might be the reason why. It certainly might resonate with a lot of you out there that it's nice to work from home. It's comfortable. We can all hide behind the mic, and we don't necessarily need to put our best foot forward in terms of outward appearance. So that's been comfortable. But that's probably where the comfort ends and the more serious stuff starts. So how do we deal with that more serious stuff, and how do we manage some of that risk? So we're going to talk about that. Obviously, there's going to have to first be a little bit of a, who the heck are you listening to? Okay, so as you heard, that's me. I'm Sean. That's the face. I don't look like the dog in the previous slide. I actually look a lot less neat normally than that dog. My background is in the information security space, but I find myself often in the conversation with other individuals, or with individuals out there, and you know, they sort of say, "What do you do?" And I say, "Well, I'm in software development, and we work in the cloud and all these things." And they say, "Oh, so you work in IT?" And I always like to start this conversation by just explaining to people that you know, IT is quite a big area. If you look at IT, there's so many different facets to IT. But this slide sort of, I've found over the years, helps me to explain to people which part of IT I fit into, so that I can at least give you a bit of background into the type of person you're speaking to. Because when you speak to someone in IT, they often they come from very different sort of backgrounds in different areas. So you might have seen this slide if you've listened to me talk before. But I sit up there in the top right. So I typically play in the software space as opposed to the hardware space. And then I almost always work in the enterprise space as opposed to the consumer space. So if you're looking at an IT person, this is a good gauge as to where they fit into the picture. What place do they, or what space do they play in? And you're going to typically find that it's either in hardware or software, and then it's either in the consumer-facing space or the enterprise-facing space. That doesn't mean to say I don't spend a bit of time in the other areas. It just means that most of my time is up there in the top right. Okay. On the bottom there, you'll see that we also have a different, well, we have a really different world out there now with on-premise and cloud conversations, especially now. But on-premise is the area of IT where there's servers and buzzing green lights flickering in people's premises or businesses. I work on the other side of the spectrum too, which is in the cloud. So the cloud, remember, is someone else's servers, and those are hosted and rented servers. So that gives you a bit of background as to where I fit into the picture. So just as a note up front is we're going to talk about some hardware stuff today. As you can see, I'm not the hardware expert. So there might even be people joining today that have a better idea of the hardware world than I do, but that doesn't matter. It's important that everyone understands that all these things fit together and that there are important things to be aware of, in that it's not just hardware, it's not just software, it's not just enterprise, it's all of it together, and it all has to work together, and it all has to be secure together. Okay, so that's the background. Okay, so moving forward, before we start, I'm not sure how many of you are currently busy with your Christmas shopping in advance of December. If so, I've found exactly what I'm looking for from you. This is the work from home outfit. And I think you'll agree with me that this has definitely got a good market out there. As you can see, it's business up top, but comfort at the bottom. And that's the way it should be. We should all definitely be working distant, and we should all be, we should be dressing appropriately. Okay, so that's enough of the work from home background. Let's talk about the real stuff that we have for today, which is obviously the cybercrime side. If we reflect back on what's happening out there, you'll see these are all the things you've heard before. We're not going to go into all of these things. We know about these things. They exist. They are there. So we've got absolutely no brand new threat areas. What is far more prevalent at the moment is where those threat areas are attacking, and also the whole new vulnerability that exists with our remote workforces, or specifically our work from home workforces. Okay, so just looking at this list, this is a recent study. There is a source there if you would like to go and learn more. But as you can see, the leading crime, sort of cybercrime threats are still in the exact same categories as we had before, which is the malware, the phishing, the ransomware. All of the digital attack vectors are still there, and they are still taking place. The only difference now is that there's a whole new avenue for these attacks to take place. So this is really what this discussion is going to center on today, is what new attack vectors exist for cybercrime, and how are we as ordinary people going to be placed in a position to start addressing these attacks? What do we do as business owners, and what do we do as just normal plain Joes working at home in our lounges or in our studies or wherever it might be? Okay, what are the things we can do? Now, a lot of the things we can do also translate into mobile workforces, and certainly also the workforce in the organization. So it sort of plays a role everywhere, and there's no reason to suggest that the threats at home are any different to the threats at the office. The only difference here is the way that we are prepared in our working at home environments for these threats. Okay, so if you look at just this slide is just talking about some of those threats. Like I said, I don't want to go into the detail there. Those are all the threats we've all heard of before. We all know about them. I'm not suggesting everyone knows the details behind them, but we are aware of them. We should be in 2020. If you're not aware that you shouldn't be opening things in email, and you shouldn't be clicking on strange links, then obviously you've probably been in a coma for a few years and have not heard enough of that conversation. But it's important that you do a bit of homework and research on your own about some of these threats. What we're going to talk about today is how these threats present new risk vectors for us because of our working from home environment. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to touch on a few things today. We're going to talk about some of the new physical challenges that we face. We're going to talk about network and device-specific risks that we might face, and where those new risk vectors might lie based on our working from home environment. We're also going to look at what new risks might exist from a data and information perspective, or what are we doing wrong at home. And then we might end with just a short conversation about awareness and behavior. So some of the top topics there. Okay. So as you can see, it's a relatively short list. And the reason why this is a short list is because the threats that exist really can only touch us in a few places. They can only really get into us from a few key areas. Now, the number of risks in each of those areas might be quite large. But if we start to address those key areas, and we start building a defense in-depth strategy, we can start to sort of mitigate a number of these risks. We'll never eliminate them all. They'll always exist, and new risks will always come to the forefront. So we'll never eliminate them all. So remember, we're talking about a workforce, and we're talking about a workforce that has now suddenly found itself working from home, or from apartments, or from any environment that is not the office. Okay, so we're talking about the physical environment first. We're talking about your home, and we're talking about the things connected to it. So I'm hoping this is going to give you some insight into what new types of problems exist that never existed in the mind of this information security professional before, or it did exist, but it was never at the scale that we are seeing now. So when we talk about an office, in the past, we've obviously spoken about an office as having a number of security mechanisms in place on a physical level. Okay, so here's just an example on the left-hand side. Before we talk about the picket fence there on the right-hand side, let's talk about the building on the left-hand side. So when you walk into your office building, depending on the size and scale of the enterprise that you work for, you might have to drive through a barrier. Then there's turnstiles with a key that you tap when you walk in. At secure areas, there's smart doors or entry doors where you either have to punch in a code or type in a key. On every sort of level or in every environment, there's a camera staring at you, trying to determine where are you going, what are you doing, should you be there, is there a threat in your behavior. In more advanced environments, you might find motion sensors, which are determining, are there any individuals in unauthorized areas and unauthorized time. Those types of sort of smarter technologies which are trying to work together to determine what risks exist in the physical environment. So at this stage, we're not even talking about your information security as computers and networks and devices. We're still talking about physically protecting the bad guy from getting into those environments. Okay. Now, when you talk about a person's home, I searched for a home on Google, and that's what came up. And I realized that in South Africa, our picket fences look a little bit different. So that's what first struck me is, you know what, in South Africa, we might be a little bit more sort of security conscious, and we might have a bit of extra perimeter defense than we might find in other countries. But I think it's nowhere near the picture in the left-hand side. So we're still not quite at enterprise level security. So this is the first challenge for an IT department as its workforce moves from the corporate environment and into the sort of residential or home environment, is what physical securities are in place. And also, more affluent workers might have better security than less affluent workers who are going home to maybe a shared living arrangement with a lower level of physical security. So they might not have alarm systems, they might not have the electric fence, they might not have all these perimeter security. So it's a totally different world out there when you're talking about the physical environment at an office block and at a residential home. Your home is obviously subject to a number of different risks that we all know about. So there's the usual suspects, there's burglary, there's fire, there's flood, and then there's a few other strange ones, like, for example, when you're working at home, your office or your security team, they don't know who's in your house. They don't know who visits you. They don't know who lives with you. I know in this time of social distancing, you shouldn't be having a number of visitors come into your house, but we still don't know who those people are. So you have suddenly a strange environment where you used to be able to protect access to equipment or access to stuff, where you suddenly don't have that anymore. So now you've suddenly got an environment where you've got individuals working at home. they might have work equipment at home, or they might be using personal equipment at home. That personal equipment might be exposed to visitors. So maybe on the weekend, there's a bribe taking place and another individual from a competing firm walks past and sees some information. You know, this might sound like real hypothetical movie stuff, but it does happen. So you do have challenges in which you are trying to protect information and you're trying to keep information secure, but you just don't know who's viewing that information, and you don't know how that information is being secured in private housing. Okay. Also, work equipment, where you might have fire suppression and all these exciting things at the office. You simply don't have that in private housing. So it's just another major challenge for the information security team at an organization to take into account. Okay, so you've got a criminal element, you've got natural elements. You might even have something as simple as a shared computer. So now suddenly you've got an individual taking their work computer home, and their child or their spouse might use the computer to perform some other unrelated task. Maybe it's a Facebook search, and suddenly your corporate information is right there and exposed to their private working environment. So you've got to be very careful about what are employees doing once they get home, where's the equipment being used, how is it being used. And to be quite frank, we haven't solved this challenge yet. We haven't figured this out yet. And the reason we haven't figured that out is because the house has never really been a major, or person's personal house has never really been a major threat area in the past. It's always been something people are aware of, but companies have rather said, no, you can't take stuff home, you can't. And then it just eliminates the problem. But we can't do that anymore, or certainly some can't do that anymore. If we look at the physical environment of a house, there's other challenges which come into play, especially now as we're moving into a world with highly connected households. So if you walk into houses now, certainly more so in countries like the United States and Australia and other first world countries, you would find there's a lot of smart devices in those houses. South Africa is slowly catching up. We are finding more and more individuals are implementing smart technologies into their houses. But there's a big challenge here. Remember now, if you suddenly have a worker working on a house network performing corporate activities, you also have hundreds of these little smart devices, be it fridges, doorbells, lighting, Wi-Fi cameras, all of these things. They're all sitting on there, and you can see there's lots of protocols in play. All of these things are running in the same home network. So you've got Wi-Fi, you've got NFC, you've got Bluetooth, and all these fancy protocols taking place. And they're all doing different things. They're running lighting, they're running magnetic sensors and imaging and thermal sensing, and they're all doing things to perform their function. So if it's that heating system, it's using thermal technologies to calculate the heat and change the heating in the environment. What does all this mean? Why is this a problem, Sean? Well, because all of these things are communicating up to a cloud somewhere. They're all communicating back to their manufacturer's cloud to instruct the device to perform a function or to do something. Okay, and this is a real big challenge, because what we're finding is that, and this is an HP study that was performed, that 90% of the devices are collecting information, personal information, via the device, or via the device's cloud or its mobile application. Okay, and you can see that 6 out of the 10 devices provide user interfaces that are simply not security. They are secure at all. They've got a number of different flaws built into them. So they're coming out from the manufacturer's environment already deeply flawed. So now you've got corporate data, you've got corporate computers connected to a network with all of these devices. They're all sending information all over the show. And they also happen to have access to the other devices in the network, which might be your corporate computer. So we're not in a scientific discussion here. We're in a real world discussion here when we say that there's no reason why one of these devices couldn't open up a major sort of hole in your network, which can leak information in or out. So we've got to be very, very aware of what we are doing when we start putting these devices into our environment. Okay, so we'll chat about that a little bit more when I get to the end, because I don't believe that there's any reason we shouldn't have these devices in our environment. but we need to do it in a secure way. Okay, so just to close off the slide, the 80% of devices, along with their cloud and mobile application components, fail to require passwords. So you see, these devices are simply, they're built to perform a function. They're not built with security at the center of their existence. They're built with function, some sort of function at the center of their existence. And often they're built at a low cost, or especially when it might be a Chinese variant that's of another device. So you've got to be very careful with these types of devices. 70% using unencrypted network services, and their 70% of the devices, along with their cloud and applications, enable attackers to identify valid user accounts through user account enumeration. So all that's basically all saying is that some of these devices are creating major threats on home networks. Now, IoT devices are also found in the workplace, but work networks are normally a little bit more enhanced to deal with the threats that these produce. And I'll talk about that in a later slide. So we've got to be very cautious, guys. These devices that we're putting into our houses, and remember, your cell phone's a device. So every single one of you have at least one device on your network. If you've got anything more than a cell phone in your environment, that could mean webcams, that could mean maybe it's your fridge, maybe, I don't know how fancy your environment might be at home, but if anything's connected to the internet, there's a risk, there's a threat there, and you need to secure that risk. This we can tell is quite a bad situation across the world. So there's for example, this picture I have up here is a service that you can go online and you can immediately start searching for webcams, not only webcams, it's industrial equipment, webcams, all kinds of different sort of IoT devices that have been either left unsecured, or perhaps they have default passwords in them. Sometimes it's printers, sometimes it's, it's all sorts of connected machines. And there's services that are out there and polling the networks, the internet, to find these devices. So it's a real threat. As you can see from that little world map on their site there, it's all over the world. It's not a US problem or an Australian problem. And there we go. South Africa does seem to even highlight quite a bit there. Okay, so in your own time, go and have a look at that. That's quite interesting. This site's sometimes a bit slow, so I'm not going to show you now, but it's a very interesting resource because it just shows you how prevalent the problem is. Within 1 minute, you can sometimes be looking at someone else's webcam across the world and staring at their own private environment, which you certainly don't think is a good sort of idea to have. Because what happens if you start to think about the industrial espionage world, there's certainly some challenges around people's webcams staring at their working environments now. It sounds like it's science fiction, but it's never really science fiction. Okay. Another challenge with working from home is the IT support department. This is a major situation we have here. So if you think about your organization, you've often got a couple of tech guys and girls. It's not pigeonhole the genders yet. You've got a couple of tech support personnel, and they're suddenly sitting in the basement waiting for problems to happen. And when a printer stops working, or when a computer stops, or an error message pops up, you phone the support department, and they come running up and they sort out your problem. Well, with your work from home environment, you don't have that luxury anymore. You suddenly find that you've got people sitting at home trying to perform their working tasks. But if there's a challenge, how do I deal with that? What do I do? What do I do to mitigate? I've got a challenge on my working environment. What's the person going to do? They're going to phone either their cousin, or they're going to call their son, or they're going to get anyone in the house who sort of knows tech to come help fix this problem. And who knows what that person's doing? Maybe they're disabling a firewall on Windows. Maybe they're shortening a password. They might be removing some sort of VPN control. You don't know what these stay-at-home tech support individuals might be doing, because it could just literally be someone's daughter sitting in their house. So this presents a major problem, because tech support cannot get to everyone's house and support them. So we've got to figure out how do we extend tech support now into private homes. If work from home, and I do believe it will become more and more prevalent, we're going to need to figure out how do we extend that support into the work from home environment. The next thing we talk about is the network. So your home environment is communicating back to an office environment or up to the cloud, we're not sure. But everything in your network at home is talking to somewhere else. Okay, so we need to look at what is the risk with people working from home, and how does it impact us. And obviously, this is another big area of challenge, because if you look at the left-hand side, that's an example of a work or an enterprise network. So you can see there's multiple access routes and firewalls and distribution switches going into data centers, connecting to computers, and through at the top there in the block, you can see security. There's a network address translation process happening, and there's an intrusion protection service, and that's another firewall on the outside going to routers out to the WAN, which is the internet. Okay, so you can see there's multiple layers of things happening, distributing, managing, securing. And then you think about your home network, and most of us just have that little black box flashing lights in the corner that hasn't been changed for 15 years. So you suddenly think to yourself, we've got enterprises sending people home to work in an emergency situation like a global pandemic. And with respect, most of them have not prepared for this. Most of them were totally caught with their pants down. So some of them were able to switch on VPN, traffic routing, and all the rest of it overnight, but others just simply didn't have that capacity in place, or the skill, or the capability. Okay, so we have a major concern here, is that these consumer devices are not designed with major security and threat prevention in mind. They are simply designed to connect TVs and laptops for basic browsing to the internet. So they're not designed with security at their core. And we can tell that this is a problem, because if you look at this picture, it's hard to tell there that one of those is a consumer device and one of those is an enterprise or a more enterprise level device, because they both look the same to the untrained eye. Even to me, as a non-network expert, those all look the same to me. It's just plastic boxes with wires coming out and aerials and the one. But some of them have different sort of capabilities, and those are the capabilities that differentiate your consumer devices from your enterprise devices. So now you should be asking yourself, what do I have at home? I don't even know. Do I know if I've got enterprise equipment? Does it matter? You know, that type of thing. So if you think about it, when you buy a new car, every year you take your car back to going in service. You go back to the dealer has a look and sticks his ear down and says, okay, there's something rattling here, let's tighten that bolt, you know, or something, you know, there was a threat, not a threat necessarily, there was a problem, we had to recall this exhaust pipe, so we're going to change that. How many of you have taken your routers back for a service? So, you know, you've got to ask yourself the question, are these things just always fine? From the day I buy them, they never have to change. And that's simply not the case, because every month, new threats are being detected, new exploits are being detected, and some of us are just not changing our routers from the day we buy them, okay? And then some of you probably don't even know that that little black box actually has settings. It's got stuff behind it, all of this fancy things, and you can see there's two examples. So there's from D-Link consumer routers and Netgear consumer router there. Someone's got to go in and set all that stuff up, and they come pre-configured with a default setup, which most people just plug in and off they go. They don't think they need to worry about it. And that's mostly the case if you're just watching a bit of Netflix and maybe doing some online shopping. But the moment you're doing something more corporate, this just doesn't cut it, okay? Someone has to get into this thing and make sure that this thing is set up correctly. Make sure that the passwords have been changed. Make sure that the UPnP might be necessarily need to be disabled, and the port forwarding might need to be set up if there's specific things you're doing, so that there's not Chinese equipment throwing data in and out of your network with its own sort of free will. This has to be locked down and this has to be secured. And you know what the problem is that enterprise knows how to do that, but consumer doesn't. The person at home simply doesn't know how to deal with this. Okay, so this is a big challenge and we need to solve this problem. And I've got a few ideas around this, but I'll chat to you a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation. Okay, I mentioned before VPNs were put in place by a number of firms, but a number of firms simply don't have the capacity to do this. The other problem with the VPN is that we find that people are using VPNs and then switching them off at night when they start doing their private surfing, but all the same corporate data sitting on the device. It's suddenly exposed, it's all there, it's just not flowing through the VPN anymore. So especially where there's remote services. So we just need to be a little bit more careful about the impression that a VPN is the solution to everything. Remember, a VPN is just a secure transport channel. That doesn't necessarily mean that that machine is always connected to it and that that transport channel is always the only way that data is moving in and out of that equipment. Which takes us to our next conversation. What about data? What are we doing to secure our data? And data is all that important stuff that you can't touch. Okay, so what we found here was that around March, when the pandemic got a bit real, we saw companies just suddenly rushing and dumping everything on the cloud. So you had small business to large business taking whole department's data and just shoving it in Dropbox, or maybe they were slamming it into their Office 365 accounts and OneDrive, and then there were people opening Team Viewer accounts to connect to servers, and it became a hot mess because now you suddenly got all this data just being thrown into environments just to make it easier for people to work from remote locations. But there was no concept of security in that exercise, especially where it was an emergency and it was rushed. So people shoved stuff in quickly so that people could access and then email passwords around, and all these types of things were taking place. But there was no thought about, is my data being segregated and secured? Is this data still being accessed now on a remote server that has absolutely no security protocols in place? Where it's on these public services, are they fit for that purpose? Who's still got the connections? Do the connections need to be revoked? So a lot of this is, while encouraging to see people are finally adopting the cloud, this is not quite exactly how the cloud advocates had envisioned it happening all overnight. But certainly something which has at least opened up people's eyes up to see that the cloud is there and it can help, but it has to be done in a proper way. And hopefully, if nothing else, this will spark at least some movement in that direction. Another interesting thing happening was with people taking stuff home, encryption suddenly becomes key, because now this data is suddenly moving out of the enterprise security walled garden and it's all over the show. So you're finding people are emailing instead of walking between environments and talking to each other, or maybe working on a document around a boardroom table. There's obviously a lot more movement of data. Maybe it's shared on a Teams meeting and dropped into a folder or something. But as things move, I don't think we realize how often it's moving outside the enterprise boundary now. It's moving between networks quite rapidly. And yes, a lot of that movement might be through encrypted channels, but are we moving unencrypted data in or through those encrypted channels? Because if it's unencrypted, all thing is the motion or the movement of the data is being done so securely. If someone were to still intercept it on either side, there's still a problem here because it's unencrypted data. So we need to be more careful about how we move data, and there's simple things we can do. You have to ask yourself the question, am I encrypting my Excel spreadsheets before I email the entire client list to my colleague? And it's a simple activity. It's something which takes 2 seconds to go into the info section of an Excel spreadsheet there and just add the protection on. But we never think to do it because we're always in such a rush. Or we copy a file onto a USB stick because we want to just quickly get it to someone. But we encrypt it first, because what happens if on the way home that person drops it out of their pocket? So this might not necessarily be a work from home problem, because I think this has always existed, but it's something we need to take into account because these risks still exist. Then there's my favorite risk, the hidden in plain sight risk. The amount of stuff that is managed in Excel spreadsheets is still frighteningly high. And we dump our entire customer bases onto an Excel spreadsheet for email. We need to move away from storing such high volumes of data on flat file storage mechanisms like Excel spreadsheets or Word documents or Access databases. We've got to migrate away from those things. Very high risk ratios. In fact, most corporate leaks come from databases that get hacked and then extracted into flat files. That's obviously the nature of how things move, but how do we mitigate? How do we move away? And the easy way to solve that problem is that we start looking at what different cloud adoption strategies are there, and how do we minimize our risk by moving our data away from flat files and onto managed cloud. Okay, this is a whole conversation. We really couldn't possibly go through all of this now because we'll be out all day. But as you can see, when you go into the cloud environment, it's a massive opportunity from the spectrum all the way from an on-premise all the way over to a software as a service environment. There's different ways to manage the risk, and there's different sort of engagement models. And each of them has varying levels of control, which you provide over to a service provider. And in some environments, this simple slide here, if we had had more companies move over from the all blue, so that all blue section means that they're doing everything. If we'd move more companies over to that sash, the all red side there, red is good in this environment. That means that companies could have instantly switched on their workforce from home in a safe and secure manner, because all of that environment would have been operating and processing in cloud data centers, which were totally unaffected by the move. So most of the businesses that have had a bit of challenge adopting work from home are sort of on that left-hand column, that blue side, where everything is running on-premise, from the network to the storage to the server to the virtualization layers and runtimes and all that stuff. So we want to get away. We want to move across to the right over time. Okay, we need to let go of control. It's okay to let go of control, because remember, the cloud employs hundreds and thousands of very highly specialized security engineers, which your company just doesn't do. So we want to get those engineers looking after our data, and not just Joe and IT. All right, awareness. This is the one slide that I just added in at the end, because you know what? It's still there. We still have to talk about awareness. The fact that people are going home doesn't mean that those policies and procedures and standards and guidelines all still apply. The fact that I'm doing it in my pajamas, in my lounge, or wherever it might be, doesn't matter. I still have to make sure that at the end of the day, I log off, I remove material from my desktop, I close or sign out of applications. There's tokens or any other security credentials that are in play. Those still need to be activated. They still need to be utilized. I cannot stress that enough, that just because we're working in other environments does not mean that we need to work differently. The same policies apply, especially where there's equipment moving around. Okay, so I've spoken about it. As you can see, the risks that comes from working at home has not really changed much. There's still a lot of the same risks. The only thing that's changed is the environment that they're operating in now. So we still need to figure out how to secure that environment. So this is something I have been playing around with personally and trying to figure out what is the best way forward. And obviously the best way forward is a combination of cost and of function, because you can't expect everyone to rush out and go and buy the most expensive equipment on the market. We can't all be running out and buying enterprise equipment. It's just not practical. It's too expensive for most people, and it's also might be overkill. We don't have server environments or network cages sitting in our houses that can house all these wonderful things. So what do? How do we smarten or secure our homes moving forward? And how do we also smarten them up at the same time? So we want our environments to be secure. Sorry, I've got a strange, this slide is meant to be up in the data section. I obviously didn't move it, but this just off the bat, if you are not seeing a little icon in your Windows that shows an encryption little lock there, then immediately you need to figure that out. You need to get your Windows encrypted. So I'm not going to spend time on that. That should have been part of the discussion above. So we'll skip past that and we'll start talking about what I think is the way forward. Okay, so on the way forward, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm seeing to work quite well from my point of view in terms of how do I start securing enterprise workers as they move into less secure environments. So this might also apply to remote workers, but either way. So the first thing is you're going to want to start doing a high level of integration between cloud and computer. So we're seeing a lot of people still working on their desktop or on environments that are not secured. When I say not secured, it means that they reside on the device. They cannot be revoked, or they cannot be, the permissions cannot be destroyed. So as you can see there, I can demonstrate that in my Windows Explorer of my own PC, it's deeply integrated into, there's a view of SharePoint on my Office 365 environment, which is the cloud service that I use for my day-to-day work. And you can see that those files are deeply integrated. So if I change one in one environment, it changes automatically in the other environment. So I'm not working with my desktop. I'm not working with any other environment. I'm using a cloud service to deeply integrate and back up, secure, authenticate access to all of my documents. So you can see this is the first step. The first step is to get your data into more secure environments. Now, remember, not all clouds are created equal and not all services are created equal. So you need to do your homework. You need to make sure that you select the best cloud service for your purpose, okay? And you also need to make sure that it's a reputable one that provides you with security. In this case, Microsoft Office 365 is obviously a pretty global powerhouse in that space, so I feel confident with my data there, okay? And also I've taken steps to secure it. So what type of steps have I taken to secure my data, and more specifically the environment that my data is working in? So what I've been playing around with in my household, and I'm not suggesting that everyone out there is technical and can do this stuff without a bit of assistance, is that I started by smartening my network, okay? And to do so, my ISP gave me equipment. That equipment was provided to me to include in obviously the setup that I did when I took out my ISP what do you call it, subscription. So what I did was I removed the Chinese Wi-Fi routes that came with it, and I've implemented an open source piece of software. So here we go, it's a low cost environment. And this OpenSense firewall provides me with almost enterprise level capabilities. And the benefit of that is that it's at a very low cost, it's almost free. The only cost involved here was the hardware that I'm running it on, which can be as small as a Raspberry Pi. So you could easily find, with the right skills, this type of implementation in a person's home would not have a major cost impact, but it would have a major impact on security. Okay. Again, you're going to want to still make sure that that's set up correctly. So you're going to want to you're going to make sure that that's in the right hands when they set and configure that up. So I'm not suggesting I'm the expert in setting the network stuff, but it's certainly saying that it's moving in the right direction. That's one example, that OpenSense that I showed you. There are many of them out there. So there's PFSense, there's Untangle, and then on the devices themselves, there's something called DDWRT. All of this means basically there's open source alternatives out there that can provide you with enterprise level network security without having to spend a fortune. The only challenge we have in town, okay, sorry, Untangle in the middle is actually a paid for service, but it's still relatively cheap compared to the equipment costs. All I'm saying is that if you have the right skills in town, you could have individuals implementing these types of technologies into a person's home, which would rapidly increase the security in home networks. And this could also work in offices. It's all enterprise ready. So in that sense, you're starting to smarten up personal networks and home networks. The second thing that you benefit from is there are other open source products. There's things like Powerhole, which is a product that provides you with advertising sort of management, so that it restricts all advertising on your network, so your privacy is protected. There's something called Suricata, which is for your intrusion protection services. So all of these things exist. They're all out there. No one knows about them because these are all very technical things, but they're not expensive. Most of them are free. What we just need is to have the same level of enthusiasm when setting up a personal home network as we have at an enterprise level. Okay, so we can suddenly start securing sort of those environments. The next thing is around the network side. Okay, so then that's what I've been doing at home, is setting these things up, testing them, and with my limited networking experience, I'm actually getting that done. I think maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll be hacked tomorrow morning and I'll have to explain it all to you. But that's part of the lessons learned. So what am I doing on the physical security layer? The next thing is a lot of people have either, like I said, an electric fence or maybe an alarm system and all these reactive things where I find out about a problem once it's happened. So there's some smart technologies available in the proactive space. So for example, this is a picture of my driveway. When I arrived home, it was yesterday, 26th. I'm not sure the date is today. Yeah, that was yesterday. So it's a recent picture I put into this presentation. So there you can see, as my vehicle arrived onto my driveway, my artificial intelligence system picked up that the vehicle was on my driveway, and it's alerted me to that fact. And it's allowed me to take action to determine whether this is a threat or not a threat before that threat may even occur. Similarly, if a person walks across my driveway, I get the same reaction. And just to show you how that works, if there's a activity where there's no threat necessary, because you can see the activities here are not happening on my driveway. Okay, sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback. Someone like to ask a question? Okay, we're near the end here. We're near the end of this conversation. So ultimately, what I'm showing you is that this is also a totally free piece of software. It's running completely free on my server environment here, which is really just a computer. It's not don't picture this as a massive enterprise server. It's just a little computer in the corner, okay? And you can see that of the alerts that it's been picking up, that little green section is the only amount of alerts that I'm actually interested in. The rest are all false alerts or irrelevant alerts based on the rules that are put. So again, it's a bit technical to set this stuff up, so it's not something that the average consumer could do, but we're getting closer to that. So we're getting closer to consumer services that could enable this. So the last thing was around smartening up your home. And this is another space which I've been playing in from a threat perspective is a lot of the IoT devices that you buy. So maybe you're going to go and buy what's these light bulbs from Philips Hue, and maybe then you're going to go and buy a Google Assistant sort of speaker, and then you're going to go and throw a few sort of other smart devices into your network, and they all start talking to all these servers, and they all start communicating data around. There's actually a whole initiative around creating your own smart devices network, and this is now where it gets quite technical. But there's a community that are building things that allow all those devices to communicate within your network and move slowly and securely out of your network where they need to. So you can reduce your risk of your devices suddenly starting to expose data out of your network because you can control them and you can control the communication. So this is a technology that I've implemented at my house to sort of reduce the amount of traffic that is happening outside of my network to rogue sort of device manufacturers. So you've got one app, one location, and all your devices talk to it, and it manages it. So the security is a lot higher there. Okay, I see I'm slowly chewing up my allotted time, so I'm gonna end on this note, and I have got one or two little 2-second demos to show you. I'm not sure, Sam, am I good for time? Can I have another 2 minutes?
Yes, absolutely, Sean, no problem.
Okay, what I'm going to do then is I'm trying to find my Zoom window. Okay, can you see what are you seeing are you still seeing the same screen?
I'm seeing your Zoom screen, yes.
Perfect, that means you're seeing my browser. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I don't want to take people's time. I'm going to take you through those 3 services quickly to show you what that physically looks like in a household. Now, I want to specify upfront that I built these things using open source technology. In other words, I've configured them together, okay? The total cost to build this has been less than 10,000 Rand. So we're not talking about a very high amount, okay? So this is really consumer level. And I probably could have done it for an even lower amount if it went for 1 or 2 learning exercises. So the first one I'm going to show you is right now you're looking at my browser. So here, if I click on this OPNS or OpenSense, that is my router. This whole thing is running my network. So as I'm speaking to you right now, I can go in and I can look at my, sorry, let's go to the insight view here. And within a few seconds, that report should pop up, and you can start seeing all the network traffic that's moving across the network as I'm speaking to you. So this is sort of like the enterprise level stuff which you wouldn't get out of an entry level consumer router. Okay, this is a totally free piece of software, and it does this with relative ease. So if I go to my traffic view here, I can start seeing what was the traffic over the past few days. Oh, sorry, that's not the one we want to see the help view. Why is all this important? Not necessarily for this. I'm not sure anyone's really interested in seeing all of this detail day to day. But what might be more interesting for consumers at home is the services that these types of things provide. So you can see there, I've got built-in intrusion detection on my network. I've got a built-in proxy service that's securing the traffic coming into my network. I've got a Let's Encrypt service to encrypt the SSL accounts of the services that are running behind my firewall. So all of this is like enterprise level stuff running in a private home, just doing its thing, okay? The other thing I've got is on the blue arrow side, the integration of those camera systems. So this is a live feed of everything that's happening around my property at the moment, okay? If you look at, there's some alerts that have taken place. I shut this down, the alerting this morning, because I didn't want to have a whole random bunch of them for this demonstration. But as you can see, this alert has told me there was movement on my driveway at 8:44 this morning. And you can see, I can quickly have a look and see, is this a threat or is this not a threat? And I can take steps to deter physical entry or physical threat to my property. I can be standing anywhere in the world and my cell phone will beep and it will send me this image. That happens. Okay. Again, this total disclosure is I don't sell the software. I've got no affiliation to the software. It's totally available for you. You can go and buy it tomorrow morning if you want it, and you can tie it to any camera system that exists. And this is available to private households, which is frightening because the stuff you would think would only be available to enterprise. The next one I talked about was my smart home setup. Okay, this is an interesting world here because everyone's house looks different. Everyone does different things at home, but they all need to secure their environment. Now, what this particular software does, also totally free, just requires a little bit of an IT mind to put it together in your environment, and you can secure your whole environment. So basically what this does is it integrates all my cameras into one place, like you saw before. It also allows me to switch my lighting into different modes or different sort of scenes. So in the morning when I wake up, I can switch all my lighting on or off. So immediately that sounds like it has nothing to do with IT, but it absolutely does have, because it's around security and securing your property and securing your environment, which ultimately is about securing the things in your house, which is the equipment and the data. So this all ties back. So I think that was what I wanted to show you, is that there are consumer options available. There's things that you can do at a relatively low cost to secure persons' houses. But we as an industry, as an IT industry, are trying to figure out how do I make this practical and simple for people to set up, because it's not easy. It's not something that you can just flick a switch. So there needs to be more awareness that consumers go and ask for their networks to be secured or their environments to be secured, and companies should be asking for that same thing, where consumers go and they update the security in their households, they update the security on their networks, because all of these things are important. Okay, so that in a nutshell is where I see the risk in working from home, what sort of cybercrimes or risk vectors still exist in that space, what I'm doing to learn about the ways that we can correct that. And I hope that that's been insightful, because I didn't want to just talk about viruses and Trojans and all the stuff we've heard about before. I'm sort of saying, how do we secure our homes? How do we secure our networks so that the threat is slowly eliminated, not only at the workplace, but also in our private residences. So this was an interesting exercise for me to go through and have a look and identify what we can do. And I think it's something which I hope I've given at least some ideas to those that are listening in about what they can do to maybe just ask a few more questions about the setups that they have in their private residences. Okay, great. So that's where I think we'll leave it today. I'm hopefully given some people some things to think about. And yeah, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Cool. Thanks, Sean. That was really great to listen to. There's a lot there that we can actually take in and try and use back in our own homes, you know. So yeah, it was really interesting. Guys, I'm opening up the floor. I'm not sure if there are any questions for Sean. If there are, we can open up our mics and we can chat. Okay. I don't see any questions coming through. Just a note.
There is a hand up there.
Oh, yes. It's on my side now too. Okay, so Ben, would you like to have a word?
Yes, thanks, Samantha. Thanks, Sean, for the presentation. I enjoyed it. The thought running through my head is, looking at some of the names, is most of us probably know how to switch a computer on and do one or two things on it. What do you think would be the best approach for us as I suppose IT professionals with the general public? You know, the moms, the dads, the uncles, the aunts, the grannies that they have a computer, they've got a laptop, they've got a tablet, and all of this stuff is just up there in the proverbial cloud for them. You know, they've been flooded this last week with the experience scenario last week. Cybercrime is hot. The banks are hitting everyone with SMSs, messages, don't worry, don't click on anything, and it's just going above everyone's head. What do you think would be a good approach by us as IT professionals, as daughters, sons, with the older generation?
Thanks for the question, Ben. I think it's a great question because I don't think it's necessarily the fault of the hardware environment, but I think the challenge we have is that hardware vendors are obviously incentivized to sell hardware devices, and once that hardware device has left the hands of the hardware vendor, they almost let go and say, okay, you're on your own now, mate, just pay me my subscription fee and I'll be done. But you almost need the hardware industry to be more reactive to home users and say, you know, I also have a security subscription or a security capability where I can come and actually not only just install your hardware and get it up and running, but update it on a routine basis and sort of keep it up to modern security threat level. Okay, so that's the first thing is it starts right there at the purchase or the sales level. So once it's now happened, it's gone into the environment where it's in, like you say, the mom and dad's living room and it's just flickering away. How do we start educating people to these risks? And the answer is quite simply, there has to be some sort of communication through either it be through computer shops or other IT engagement areas. So it's got to be done at that level where when I walk into a computer shop and I'm about to buy a computer, I can also see that there's network risks that are happening in the background that you need to be aware of. Who are the people you can contact that do this, and how are they going to solve that problem? Because the challenge is that private households are never going to be regulated by businesses. You can't ever have a business come into a private house and say, you have to do this. It's going to have to be driven by the IT sector as almost a public service announcement to the general market to say, look, guys, there are still risks. Even though you've spent money on this equipment, it's every day it needs to be serviced and updated. So we've got to figure out how to communicate that. It's a very difficult one, but the messaging has to be clear. We're already seeing a lot of messaging going out about password control, and when there's leaked information on websites, that all gets communicated. So it just has to continuously be driven out with other messages, because it's a very difficult space, because businesses cannot come into people's private households and force them to do things. We have to turn that sort of responsibility around and say private households should want to be more secure. I don't want to buy a car unless it's got airbags. I don't want to get into a vehicle unless the seatbelt's working, or the headlamps work. I know when I get into a vehicle, I want to be safe. So why do I happily sit in my lounge and not ask any questions of the devices in my house? When I go into a store or go online and I buy a piece of equipment online and it says it's going to install an app on my phone and turn on my lights and do all these things, I'm not asking, well, I certainly am, but a lot of people aren't asking questions about where's my data going when I flick that switch? Who's interpreting that data? Who are they sharing that information with? Is your smart fridge telling some vendor how many times you are reaching for this shelf, or is your washing machine sort of letting is your washing machine ever going to eventually tell your vendor how many times you wash certain loads? I mean, what data is being leaked from your house? You don't know. So you need to ask those questions. It's becoming more and more important, and especially as devices become smarter and smarter. So it's so important. But really, what is the answer? It's difficult, because we're talking about people's personal spaces now, and we're asking them to take initiative. So it's a difficult one. But I hear you, Ben. I'm hoping we can figure that out. Is there anyone else that has anything more? Ben, do you have anything to follow on that? Yes, Ben, carry on.
Sorry, Sean and Sam. I just see some of the questions coming through, and perhaps just to not answer, but maybe just make it more real for individuals. I see Kevin.
Okay.
asked the
Yes.
question about viruses and corporate networks and whatever.
Okay.
In the very recent, so the answer is yes and yes. In the very recent past, in our lazy, laid back little town of East London, retirement village, these things are happening. I've personally dealt with some ransomware attacks that have happened from people working at home, remote desktoping into office networks that were thought to be secure. So it is real, it is happening. So I suppose from my own viewpoint is that we should be almost standing on the street corner shouting out to everyone that they are going to break in. You need to have your burglar bars up. It is real. Don't just not read the emails or the communications from the people that are telling you what is happening. So yes, it is happening. It can do all of these weird and wonderful things we see in the movies and maybe think it's just Hollywood. I don't want to sound like a doomsday prophet, but it is serious. And I think that seriousness is what we should take through to our own personal networks, is to almost, as IT professionals, myself as one, is to share that message with everyone. Enough of a rant from me, Sean. I'll leave you to it.
No, 100%. I absolutely agree with Ben's assessment there. I've also seen it. It's definitely happening. And it's not something you hear about every day, because it's one of those sort of taboo sort of things. Is if you get hacked, you don't want to shout it from the rooftops. It's not something you're proud of. So people that have had these things happen to them, generally you don't hear about it. So to answer the question then, how secure is using apps like TeamViewer or AnyDesk? And can an infected PC at home spread a virus to the corporate network? The answer is absolutely yes to the next question, or the second part of that question. An infected PC at home can absolutely spread a virus to the corporate network, simply because the corporate network is allowing that PC onto it. So it's authenticated, it's allowed on. Unless the corporate network has very sophisticated intrusion detection systems and things to mitigate that risk, in which case there might be a potential for that virus not to get through, but it certainly has got half the battle is won in that it's connected to the network through a VPN. So the VPN just creates a secure channel. It's basically a nice, clean, simple corridor from my network to your network, and the virus can march on through. It's up to the corporate network's intrusion detection systems to make sure that it gets stopped before it walks through the door at that network site. So TeamViewer and AnyDesk are absolutely secure products. There's nothing wrong with them. The challenge is that, as with anything, if it's used in an environment that itself is compromised, then they become unsecure. So you can take any of those products, you can put them into an insecure environment, and they will become unsecure by virtue of the fact that they become one whole holistic unsecure environment. So important notes to take there is that those products must be updated. They issue routine patches and updates, and you need to make sure that you're using the latest version of those products, because as threats are detected, those threats are patched and those products are updated. That's your first step. And then your second step is to make sure that when I'm connecting using TeamViewer, that perhaps I don't want to be doing that at a airport sort of lounge over the publicly accessible Wi-Fi. You know, the usual sort of things that we've heard before. So that's the answer to those two questions. The second portion of that question, Kevin, I see you asking around local service providers. There's not one answer here. So, I'm not going to say go to Joe's IT services and they will give you, all the sort of response you need. It's multifaceted. When you do an assessment, unfortunately, you need to look at physical hardware, you need to look at perimeter security, you need to look at network, you need to look at the configuration of the network. So I think it's up to us as the local IT fraternities to come together and maybe say, what is a sort of a holistic assessment that we can offer a resident, and at obviously a very reasonable residential rate, and say, look, we can come in, we can assess these 5 things. That's the type of cost you would look at, and it's manageable. So the answer is it's going to be multiple stakeholders. So yeah, that's something I think we'll work with the chamber to try and see if there's an answer to that question in terms of what individuals are out there, and then hopefully we can communicate via the chamber channels as to what facilities are available. Thanks very much, Sam. I'm going to hand over to you, and you can continue with this process. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Sean. Guys, those questions were exceptional. Really touched the heart of some of these, cyber threats that we are all experiencing. We even have kids. I mean, like Ben mentioned, with regards to kids being on social media apps and stuff, and then how secure are these apps when you've got people who come on there and you don't even know who's looking at your kids' photographs, etc. I just want to share with everybody before everyone leaves. Sean, we had an interest from Bethesda where we had Lynn Knock asking from KGI Holdings. She runs an introductory course on cybercrimes and would like to be in touch with anybody who would like to go through the course content in particular, just to see if they would do something like that to learn more. So I've put the details up on the screen. If anybody would like those details on email, I can certainly send them out. There is a skills portal that Bethesda houses, so that will be there as well. But yes, it's actually quite informative. And then obviously just running through with the rest of our program. Next week, guys, we'd be encouraged to have all of you on board again. So maybe consider RSVPing for the sports dialogue with Makai and Tini. It'd be great to have you on board for this. It's talking about sports development in the Eastern Cape. We should have great interest on that as well, learning about protocols, etc., and how sport is being affected. And any ladies, we are trying to encourage our ladies to start networking. So we're doing small packs at this stage of 50 ladies. We've got a Secretary's Day business forum. It is a breakfast at Blue Lagoon. If anybody would like to be in touch, we've got that running as well. So yes, that's about it from us. Sean, thank you so much for being with us today and connecting with our members and adding value back to the community. We really loved having you. Thank you again.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everyone. And hopefully we can engage. Thanks.
Perfect. Guys, I will send out details on email. We will have that rolling for you, no problem. And then what we can do is, if anybody's got further questions for Sean, we'll hook you up with Sean directly. All right. We encourage a great day further. Be safe and stay warm. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, Sean. Thanks very much. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.